Thank you for choosing Talks News, your only source into anti-immigrant sentiment so that we may secure a land and future for our future white children. I think I butchered that, but that's mainly because I don't remember it that well. Mark it as March 18th, 2021, and we begin with the old Pledge of Allegiance. POA. I pledge allegiance to liberty and justice for all. Now, my beginning, I guess, intro thing that I did earlier, the anti-immigrant sentiment and the, securing a land and future for our white children thing, comes off the heels of Tucker Carlson getting in a bit of flack yet again for basically having like a shorter version of the 14 words on his show. If the 14 words are unfamiliar to you, good for you. But in his segment here, highlighting Ilhan Omar and another representative I'm not too familiar with, the headline is, "We have to fight to preserve our nation and heritage." Kind of echoing the sentiment of the 14 words, which is a white supremacist slogan, usually marked on the internet or other ways is 1488, meaning 14 words, 88, eighth letter in the alphabet is H, so it's 14 words, Heil Hitler. So it's a very fringe thing going on, but it's not like it. This even comes almost immediately. Oh no, it doesn't. This is actually just off the heels of John Oliver pointing out the fact that Tucker Carlson repeats the 14 words, not necessarily verbatim in the saying, but just enough to get his point across. His dog whistling can be heard by the right people. And so with that happening, also the House just recently passed 2 immigration reform bills, coming off the heels of Trump's extremely exclusionary, xenophobic policies at the border during a refugee crisis in South America and multiple countries. So we have these wonderful, wonderful videos. I think, you know what? We'll begin. It's both Fox News, one Laura Ingraham and the others, some other people. I don't remember their names. But we have legal U.S. immigrants call new reform bills a quote-unquote slap in the face. Wonderful. Let's have the people who are already here turning against the people who want to come in. Let's do it. Let's get it.
On this vote, the yeas are 228. The nays are 197. The bill is passed.
There you have it. The House has passed 2 immigration reform bills, making it easier for dreamers and migrant farm workers to become citizens. But is this fair to the immigrants who came here legally? Here to weigh in, Agnes Givney, a legal immigrant from Hungary who founded the Angel.
It's kind of funny how they're framing this argument. It's almost like equivalent to the student debt argument, is that since like everybody's already gotten their everyone who's already paid off their student debt, is it fair for us to forgive all the student debt that's out there now? And it's like, yes, it's totally fine. Should have done it for the people who paid it off, but unfortunately we're so slow in getting things done in this system, especially for people who are in the middle to lower income classes, that it's totally fine. Sorry that people didn't pass it earlier, but it's unfortunate that people who, I don't know, not reaped the benefits, but people who go through this similar process get upset that it becomes easier for other people eventually, when probably we should have had those kind of guardrails in the first place.
Families of America, good morning to you. It's so important to get your perspective on this because you came here legally, and now, as you saw, the House just passed 2 bills that would make it easier for folks who didn't come here legally, dreamers and migrant farm workers, to get that citizenship. So what are your thoughts on these 2 bills?
Not sure dreamers came through here illegally. I do remember seeing that their status is marked as undocumented, which I find a little bit interesting. I have a little bit more to dive into that, but the Dreamers program was a bit for children who were brought here across the border to get their citizenship, and it was a part of Obama's era, and Trump did a decent enough job to try and dismantle that program, although unsuccessfully. It didn't really stop the targeting of Dreamers, and also any of the children who were still trying to come across at the time, as he was trying every immigrant and refugee in criminal court, thus separating families and holding them in detention centers much longer than necessary. Um, the farm workers too, there's a lot of them, the protections are coming from people who have work visas and people who are on temporary protected status, so I can't necessarily say that they're outright illegal. So these are just people that don't have citizenships. It doesn't actually mean that they've illegally crossed the border, and now we're trying to just speed up the process into making them citizens.
All I can say is this is incredibly disappointing. We're experiencing the most corrupt, unethical, and criminal Democratic Congress in the history of the United States. We had already passed.
I mean, I would love for Agnes, I believe it is. I would love for her to explain how giving an easier path to citizenship or temporary work status to immigrants actually proves that the Democrats are corrupt, mainly because it's not a bunch of immigrant lobbyists that are doing this to benefit them. The thing is, though, is that as we add more low-skilled laborers to the market, it does kind of hurt the bargaining chances for just the citizenry in general, because the more workers it is, the cheaper the labor can be. And that's why it's like there's a bigger fight against making the $15 minimum wage, because those newly citizenized migrants would also benefit off of that. And so it would kind of level out that playing field for all these low skilled laborers across the entire nation, especially in those other states that still have pretty low minimum wage earners. So I'm just really curious on how they're the corrupt ones in this circumstance, other than maybe tying in the idea that yes, businesses benefit from a larger low-skilled labor pool, because then they have cheaper labor coming off of that, so corporations benefit from it, and then Democrats are in bed for corporations to get more immigrants in here. But then again, like, it's just, I think the right is ignoring their own corruption to constantly blame the immigrants for all of these problems, when automation slowly eats up all of these jobs, and we continue to demonize immigrant workers as the people who are taking our jobs, even though outsourcing and automation has been a much bigger driver of unemployment or the job loss in America than immigrants have.
Amnesty bill by Reagan, and it has proved to be a total failure. This is a slap in the faces of every legal immigrant who follow the laws, and a slap in the face to the millions of Americans.
Dreamers are following the laws. TPS are following the laws, and the migrant workers, I'm pretty sure, are following the laws. I think it's very funny too that Trump, shortly after becoming president, had to deport, I can't remember how many workers from Mar-a-Lago, but we found out that they were illegal immigrants that still got jobs at Mar-a-Lago, and he then deported them after he became president.
Who are unemployed, and at a time of a crisis in pandemic, we're bringing more illegal aliens and allowing them to bring their families and aunts and cousins, and this is not fair. This is
the thing about the reform bill and Biden's policies is that it's really just allowing children to get access into the country, beyond the detention centers, actually getting either a sponsor, foster care, or meeting up with a family member who's already here. As far as full families go, and this is kind of a problem, because this actually has been encouraging unaccompanied minors to come without their families, because whole families are being sent back into Mexico or sent back into their countries. So we're not getting 100% of the truth here, really. So
absolutely disappointing.
Yeah. Well, we also have Mike Diaz joining us. He's a legal immigrant. He legally immigrated to the United States from Mexico, as well as.
I would love for them to be like, all right, now we have an undocumented illegal immigrant here to argue his case as to why he should earn citizenry, even though he illegally entered through the coast of Florida. I have no idea, but like that would be just like I got a kick out of it that they're highlighting we have another legal immigrant pundit to speak on this and another legal immigrant pundit to speak up on this, and then to get the other side of the story, an illegal immigrant. They're not going to do that, but that I just think it's funny that they're highlighting their citizen status to like appoint their authority on the subject. It's funny. It's very funny.
As Amapola Hansberger. We see that you have arrived as well, who legally immigrated from Nicaragua. So, Mike, I also want to get your take on this, because I think everybody sees the footage of people coming to this country, and their heart does go out for them because they are in such a desperate state and they want to get here so badly. But you immigrated here from Mexico legally. So what's your take on this?
And the problem for me too is that they don't want to get here so badly because of the American dream. They're fleeing like war-torn, corrupt governments, and like governments too that have completely mishandled the COVID pandemic as well. So like they're looking for amnesty, and it would be wonderful if rather than starting the School of Americas in their countries back in the 80s, where we trained death squads to rip apart their governments, rather than doing that, we actually helped to figure out how to bring their governments closer to a democratic state. That probably would have avoided this issue rather than starting schools for death squads in the 80s. We could have rethought that process.
Well, my take is, you're absolutely right. The folks come here want to be in America. They see this as a land of opportunity, as millions of people have throughout the 200 years,
And like highlighting that is just like a piece of American exceptionalism, is that our country is so great that these people just can't resist but coming here, even though trying to make the trek to Europe is incredibly more dangerous because they have to cross entire oceans to get over there. Whereas like it's not even that safe to come from the countries that they're coming from through Mexico to our border. It's still dangerous, but it's not as dangerous as trying to get to Europe. And I'm sure, I don't know how Canada's handling their immigration and if they have as much xenophobia as we quite do, especially in the states around the southern border. Um, yeah, I feel like if they had an easier access to Canada, I feel like some of them would choose to go to Canada so long as they could get amnesty. They're more interested in amnesty than they are actually becoming part of our culture. Maybe there are some who are blinded by the lights of American exceptionalism and think that we're that great of a place that they would want to stay here. But I'm sure that amnesty is more important than assimilating into the culture, especially if most of them like where they lived. I feel that most people who come here seeking refugee status are more interested in going back home as soon as possible. Now, for the Dreamers and the TPS statuses and the work visas, probably more likely wanting to stay in the United States looking for long-term financial gain so that they can have a secure and stable life. So yeah, there's probably both sides of this. I was thinking of it more of a refugee crisis kind of situation because that's mostly what we're seeing at the southern border, less than people who want to become full-fledged citizens.
but there's a process, right? And it is like the other speaker was saying. It for those of us that have done it legally, it's kind of a slap in the face, and for those that are going through the process, I'm sure they're very, very frustrated how they've done everything right, only to have an administration open the border and just allow folks to.
And again, we're not receiving new applications. We're not accepting any new applications unless they're unaccompanied minors. So the thing is that we're not really opening our borders, and it's like using that phrase is just fear mongering in the idea that all these Southern immigrants are coming to ensure that the Democratic Party stays in power and erode the American traditional culture. So like, no. It's not happening like that. And these two bills, from my understanding, is trying to make the access to citizenship for people who are already here, either on TPS status worker visas or the Dreamer program, which all of them take bureaucracy and legalization process. So I don't know how he thinks that this is just granting citizenry to a bunch of undocumented immigrants that are in our country.
To come in and but really at the end of the day, it's the problem is a lot bigger than just is it a fairness issue and what I think about it or what other folks that are doing it correctly. It also affects many Americans that may be American born, right?
See, and that's very interesting here is he's like, I'm not too focused on whether it's fair for me, the legal immigrant group. I'm actually more concerned for the people who already were born here. That I'm concerned about their fairness. And that's kind of some pandering a bit. That's kind of some pandering. We're on Fox News.
The labor pool, for example.
And I agree with the labor pool argument is that, corporations tend to use immigrant statuses, work visas, and all of this to have cheaper labor, and it cheapens the labor of those other US born citizens who are trying to attain the same low skilled jobs. But maybe we could raise the minimum wage then.
Gets is affected by the surge of immigrants. Human trafficking, where I live in San Diego County, it is a hub for human trafficking, and so you got to also.
Human trafficking is a problem, a social issue that happens in the United States, in Mexico, in South America, in Canada. It happens globally. But the thing is, though, is that conservatives have spent a lot of their time trying to equivocate these unaccompanied minors as human trafficking. So while a lot of them do have to either have some like guardian that's close to the family or some smuggler, unfortunately, guide them to the border because of, the fact that it's not that safe and easy. They consider that specifically human trafficking, equating it to the idea of like sex slavery. So it's not good characterization here to reach the actual truth of the situation going on here. And it's just kind of demonizing the process of immigrating.
Look at the human suffrage that's going on, and that's created by some of these policies. That's what should be keeping people up at night, not whether it's fair for me as an immigrant that came in legally, but what's happening to those kids and adults as they are captured in these nets of human trafficking.
Okay. Are we talking about human trafficking or the detention centers of children? Because also that's like kind of a form of human trafficking if we're keeping people into the border. And then if we're going to be this loose with terminology, then we can say keeping people in detention centers for 2 to 4 years before deporting them, that's human trafficking. So we're being way too loose with the language here, and it's funny to me that he's more worried about the kids being human trafficked in his own perspective of the definition than he actually was of the conditions of the border as it was during the Trump era. So these are huge issues. Like the thing is too is that Fox News completely ignored the fact that they were sterilizing refugee women at these detention centers. I think 30 cases is into my knowledge of 30 women being sterilized, and that wasn't a humanitarian issue to them. But them now worried about the human trafficking because then that means that we can close our border to stop this human trafficking. That's the humanitarian crisis that they're concerned about
as they make their way across up into America.
Well, I think that there is bipartisan support for Dreamers, but Congressman Steve Scalise says that right now, as we're facing such a border crisis, this would send the wrong signal because then more people will want to come over, and these two.
And you understand too, the border crisis in the conservative perspective is the fact that people are coming. The border crisis really is at the fact that Trump's administration clogged up the machine heavily. And then on top of it, we have way more unaccompanied minors than we can really even process. And it's a extremely damaged system right now, and any attempt to reform it is somehow like contributing to the crisis. Although trying to get these kids out of these detention centers, we're catching COVID, spreading COVID, and any other inhumane act that may be associated to being in these detention centers is trying to be alleviated through the process of moving them into the country rather than deporting them into a situation that is far worse. And it's amazing to me.
Two bills, although they just passed in the House, will have a more difficult time in the Senate. Senator Dick Durbin did talk about these bills. He said a legislative solution is long overdue for dreamers who have devoted their lives to our country. Undocumented migrant farm workers doing backbreaking agriculture work during this pandemic to keep food on our table, and TPS recipients who have built their lives here and are making essential contributions to our national recovery. Emma Pola, can you respond to that?
Yes, I'd like to say that nevertheless, it's insulting to the people that have waited years to be able to come and to be, that have gone through the process of studying all of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, etc.
You still have to do, like, the citizen test is still a part of no matter what process. They're seriously conflating the legislation to the idea of just automatically granting citizenship, as if it's not just unclogging the machine to citizenship. So it's just very fascinating to me. Because because they want it to sound as chaotic as possible. So like they're making this sound like there's absolutely no bureaucracy or process into this whatsoever.
Through the test, so they can become citizens and be able to vote. It is a privilege, and it is not treated like a privilege. With this bill, they will be able to vote almost right away.
And that's what conservatives are terrified about. But the thing is, though, is that if you didn't have such harsh immigration policies, you would get immigrant votes.
Can vote illegally and not be persecuted. I think prosecuted, that is. And it's also a tremendous slap in the face for angel moms that have lost children to illegal aliens.
And I know that speaks that you know, Agnes, unfortunately, is one of them.
Yeah, and that's you know, anybody dying is a tragedy, to be honest with you. But there's much more violent crimes by our own citizenship than there are by illegal immigrants. So by blaming them solely for, you know, blaming all immigrants for the crimes of every actor, that would mean that we have to blame ourselves for every action that our own citizenry does, and they're not willing to do that. Every time we've had a white shooter who is, you know, pretty clearly a white supremacist, we muddle those waters and try to pretend that it has nothing to do with race, so that it's not associated to the abstract idea of white supremacy that is still in this country. So if we can't do that, if we can't hold white supremacy accountable for influencing people to do hate crimes, then we shouldn't be holding all immigrants accountable for the crimes committed by illegal immigrants. Pretty easy, right? But you know, it's just not going to stop them. And all of these points we've been hearing since Donald Trump announced his campaign to run. And I'm sure Rush Limbaugh had his time doing it before Trump even ran in office. So it's just really unfortunate that, like, these people who did go through a certain process to become legal citizens of the United States want to stifle that situation for others. It is really unfortunate, and it just kind of speaks to what kind of privilege they might have had during the time that they actually immigrated to this country.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, and your perspective, all of your opinions are so important, because I do feel like the folks who migrated here legally, came here legally, are a forgotten part of this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
These people that are getting citizenry are on the same process of, you know, doing it through legal channels. So it's just, it's amazing to me that they keep equating it to illegal, even though it's being processed specifically through legislation. It is so weird. It's just like, what is that thing from 1984? It's doublethink, that like the process of democratic bureaucracy is to give people illegal immigration citizen status. It's so contradictory and doublethink, and it double standards. It's gnarly, so gnarly, and out of like, just insane. Next up, we have white supremacist Laura Ingraham, and I am not afraid to call her that. I am certainly not afraid to call Laura Ingraham a white supremacist, because I am pretty sure her and Tucker Carlson have long talks about preserving the land and future for the generations of white children to come. I can feel it in my bones. I even remember when she was at the RNC and she did that little Nazi salute before going, oh, I actually have to wave, otherwise this might look bad. So
Now, back in September 2019, then candidate Joe Biden gave us a glimpse at how he would manage the southern border.
What I would do as president is several more things, because things have changed. I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
But despite the words you just heard Biden say, he's adamant that his rhetoric has nothing at all to do with the current crisis. In fact, the Biden administration has blamed everything from crafty coyotes to hurricanes to the previous president. And now Democrats are cracking out a new tinfoil conspiracy and blaming the men and women defending our borders.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's rhetoric is, it has a similar effect to Trump's, and Trump's was on the other end of this spectrum. Biden's does focus to sound more like a sanctuary for the situation going on at the border, although he's done, very minimal to actually alleviate the situation besides building a new facility because we had an influx of new refugees based on the fact that we changed our presidents. So yes, Biden's rhetoric and his platform can be attributed to the fact that people do feel like it's safer to come to the border, but his policies specifically still deter families from coming here, or even we're not accepting new applications, like I've said before. So even though his rhetoric said that specifically, that they're going to surge, I think he mostly meant that we're going to focus on the people that have already been processed by the Trump administration while not accepting any new applicants, because that would just I'm not sure 100% of what his reasons are, other than the fact that we probably can't house these many immigrants in these detention centers.
According to the Daily Independent, former HUD Secretary Julian Castro said he wouldn't be surprised if the Border Patrol Union was colluding, there it goes again, colluding with Republicans to undermine Biden because Trump encouraged their worst instincts and fostered a culture of anti-immigrant sentiment. Joining us now is Hector Garza, National Border Patrol Council President, and Steve.
I mean, when you bring up collusion, you do need to have some proof, but I'm not going to say that, ICE and the Border Patrol are really excited to be working under Biden, especially since Trump really focused in resources to give to the Border Patrol and ICE. So, if they get a president who's going to give them heavier funding, I'm sure they're going to pick him over them. And also, too, ICE and the Border Patrol have a culture of wanting people who are anti-immigrants so that, they can do their job properly. So it's it makes sense to me. I don't think there's clear signs of collusion. I do think that there is a general anti-immigrant culture that was cultivated between ICE, CBP, and Trump. That for sure. I don't think you need a lot of collusion for that to happen.
Stephen Miller, former White House senior advisor to President Trump. Hector, it's like blaming, the fire department after you set fire to your own house. It's their fault. It's the fire department's fault for trying to put out the fire. Your response to Castro tonight?
No, I feel like what Castro's analogy would be closer is to hiring pyrotechnics or pyromaniacs as firefighters. Is that you have people who need a fire in order to be there. So the situation was exacerbated by Trump flooding resources to deport and detain as many immigrants as possible, while it's very frustrating because any move of alleviation to the border crisis that they named Biden's border crisis, even though he's been president for 2 months, dealing with the aftermath of Trump's policies. I shake my head in shame. Just so much shame.
You know what? This is just one more example of the hypocrisy of the liberal media pushing Castro's agenda and allowing Castro to make baseless allegations without providing any type of proof. Now, let's make it very clear. We do not dictate policy with any administration. Under President Trump, we had great dialogue, and we did provide advice to President Trump on border security issues, but we do not dictate policy. He's wrong.
Well, here's what I say, Stephen. We have a massive humanitarian, security, health, and economic crisis all wrapped into one at that border. What is the most shocking aspect of what you're seeing tonight on the border from what you're...
I mean, that's very fascinating because there's like those issues are very focused. You know, let me go back to the 4 words that she said here.
An economic crisis.
Let me go back.
Well, here's what I say, Stephen. We have a massive humanitarian.
So the humanitarian crisis seems to be unspecified by Laura Ingraham because she uses 4 words to culp in here. But by saying humanitarian, I'm not really quite sure what she's insinuating here. Because the humanitarian crisis at the border has been the same since Trump took office, which was the overcrowded detention centers and the lack of sanitation, the lack of PPE, and also the sterilizing of women and the separation of families. So there's a lot of humanitarian crisis going on that they've ignored under the Trump administration, or even took an apologist type of position to. So let's get to the next word.
Security.
That's just the idea that all these immigrants are coming in to destroy and deteriorate our great American country, even though the FBI yet again has come out and said that white supremacist violence is the biggest threat to domestic security than Muslim terrorists. The white terror is more of a threat to our own domestic security than illegal immigrants or legal immigrants. So we're just moving that to the southern border because, Fox News feeds off the anti-immigrant xenophobia, fear-mongering.
Health,
I guess, has nothing to do with humanitarian, I guess, but we're going to focus in on the fact that they're letting in all these immigrants and not testing them for COVID, even though that's false. They test them as they come into the border, and unfortunately then they get put into detention centers that are overcrowded with people who have COVID. But if they test positive when they first came to the border, they get sent to a hotel for isolation and quarantine. So we're not getting into any specifics here. This is just the idea that we're facing 4 crises at once in only one section of our country, which is the border, when that's not even true. We have humanitarian crisis in the fact that we're not really helping the refugee situation that's going below our southern border. We're suffering in a security aspect that we're having a growing civil war or even white domestic terrorism, stochastic terrorism going on. The health, the fact that, we have the pandemic that ran rampant through us, and we're still working with a privatized insurance industry that just feeds off the debt of sick people. And then economy, which, it's so ridiculous. This is just fear mongering to the zenith.
Economic crisis, all wrapped into one.
Which is great that she brought Stephen Miller on here, who was like the patriot that put forward the zero tolerance policy to Trump's desk.
At that border, what is the most shocking aspect of what you're seeing tonight on the border from what you're reading and reporting?
The most shocking thing, Laura, is that talking to all of my...
Oh, yeah, and he also wrote, Trump's July 4th speech at Mount Rushmore, which I remember covering, and was one of the most fascistic speeches I've heard from Trump. It was so... It was crafted perfectly for a fascist. It really was. So, Stephen Miller, suspected fascist, maybe a crypto one. Who knows?
My sources at the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol and ICE are releasing the vast majority, virtually all, in fact, minors traveling alone, and they're releasing the vast majority of adults traveling with children across.
That also happened under Obama as well, where only 4% of minor children, immigrant minors were deported. Out of 890,000. Trump just kept them in the detention centers much longer. And I think, as the head of Department Homeland Security, I think Stephen Miller can probably take more credit for that. So that's cool.
The border. You have border agents that are being instructed to literally drive busloads of illegal immigrants and release them into communities. Others, by the thousands, are being sent to ICE, not for being...
See, isn't it kind of funny that Stephen Miller uses the idea of busloads of immigrants coming into communities as something that you should worry about? That's just so amazing to me. That's like, this is the issue that they're so clinged on to. If it's not culture war, then it's immigrants. If it's not doing stuff with the culture, then it's the immigrants that we have to scare people with.
Removed from the country, but to
And
be
it's also funny to think that they would just pull up to some random community and just drop off a bunch of immigrants there, as if there's still like not any process to the legalization of immigration status. Why do we pretend like it's such an easy thing to do?
put on what's called ADT. That stands for Alternative to Detention. And that means that they are going out into the community. They're just going to be released, never to be heard or seen from again. That is functionally, by any definition, open borders. That's a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a public safety crisis. And today, when Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, testified in front of the House, and he pretended like his policies weren't responsible for this crisis, it was a shameful lie. It is a shameful lie.
We're going to get to that comment during this hearing today.
Again, immigrants, legal and illegal, commit less crimes than our own citizens. So if you're really worried about your community, you should start being suspicious of your neighbors. Like, is that the kind of fear-mongering society that we want to live in? Is it really?
Stephen just referenced, watch.
The border is secure and the border is not open. We are not expelling children who arrive unaccompanied without a parent or legal guardian, and we are caring for their custody and their sheltering.
Hector, he's once again encouraging parents to send the kids on this dangerous journey to our southern border.
Noam Chomsky had a great saying that it's probably not even Noam Chomsky who had said it, but I think he was quoting somebody else, but I had heard him say it once, is that if the land was safe, a mother would not put her child on a dinghy across the ocean. And it's the same idea that if the country was safe, they would not send their child on a dangerous exploration to our border. So it is just insane to me that we're, getting mad at Biden for having a slightly more humane policy of allowing children to come into our country, and still demonizing that fact that it's an incentive to send their kids unaccompanied, even though we could have policies that would incentivize families to come together. But we don't. We don't.
Meaning a lot of the parents are probably in Mexico or waiting themselves to walk across the border or to float across the border and then to join their children here. Isn't this just encouraging a huge stream of multiple family members coming across the border, given what he said?
And isn't this segment focusing on immigration, fuel to a fire of anti-immigrant sentiment to a lot of far-right militia and extremists to do something about it?
Unfortunately, I would have to disagree with Secretary Mayorkas. We do have an open border, and we do not have a secured border in McAllen, Texas.
Like they're literally even showing like the border. Like there was a little clip earlier of the Border Patrol processing people. So it's very strange to me that they're still having this fake idea, this imaginary just flood of people walking through the gates, hopping onto a bus, and popping into your community. It's insane.
We have something that's known as a temporary outdoor processing site. That's basically turned into an illegal port of entry, where we're processing thousands of family units, hundreds and thousands of unaccompanied.
Oh my God! Like they literally talked about a temporary tent that processes people's either claims for asylum or claims for immigration. And even though that is sanctioned by the federal government to be a legal port of entry, he names it an illegal port of entry. This is just bonkers. There's no rational, logical thought to actually getting immigrants to a safe place in this country, especially with how we demonize them into the idea that they're a bunch of, illegal criminal rapists, drug dealers, human trafficking smugglers. Like, none of this is creating a safer space in the United States for, immigrants and asylum seekers.
Children, and we are releasing them into the United States. Now, what's more frustrating is that this crisis is very preventable, and it's all due because of the changes in policy.
Which, like, his policy prevention is by turning them back either leaving them in Mexico or turning them back to the countries that they left, which does not help the humanitarian crisis that we're facing globally. Like, this is like, if we imagine it from when Trump held the Muslim ban, it's in the same regards. Like, these people are leaving war-torn countries, trying to find amnesty so that they can live decent lives. And this is like, no, the proper thing for us to do is to send them back, and out of sight, out of mind, boom, no humanitarian crisis.
The Biden administration, they got rid of the migrant protection protocols. They got rid of the fact that minors do not qualify for Title 42 removal. And because of those policies, now we're seeing human suffering on the border. And we're frustrated, and it's definitely a crisis, and those policies need to change.
But everyone has to...
But I mean, there was no humanitarian crisis under the Trump regime. That's what he's acknowledging there and insinuating.
Understand that the men and women who are left to clean up this mess and to try to deal with the mass wave of humanity coming into the country are being demonized by the Democrats led by Julian Castro. He is demonizing law enforcement at our border enforcement. I mean, Stephen, they claim to support law enforcement officers, public servants. No, they don't. They only praise them when they're carrying out their open borders agenda. But Stephen, I have to ask you one question. So I'm very passionate about this. Everyone knows. Stephen, the idea that they are not allowing cameras or even some Republican office holders access to these facilities, what does that tell you about what's going on inside?
There's been people who have gone to the southern border, and a couple of Republicans have, and they've reported on it, and they've ended up on Fox News talking about it. So I don't know what she's talking about.
It tells you that what is going on, and this is what all of my sources are saying, is so much worse than anybody.
They literally even showed pictures of those temporary tent sites. So again, what are you talking about?
Realizes the volume of people arriving, the conditions, the crowding, the unsanitary nature.
Why are his lips so pink? Is that because of like my computer or what? But his lips are super pink.
Nature of how they're being kept because of the coronavirus, and the number that are being released is exponentially worse than anybody realizes, all because of Biden's policies. And one more thing, Laura, every single reporter in America should be asked.
I like how, like, whatever Biden does to it, like, they're going to feed off of the idea it's so much worse than you actually know. And then that actually leaves a lot of room for conspiracy theories and fringe groups to grab onto those people and explain this is how bad it is. And it's just not even.
Asking the Biden administration, how many criminals have been released by ICE because of the memo shutting down ICE enforcement? My sources tell me that most interior enforcement removal of criminals has stopped. That means dangerous people, felons.
I think it was like first 60 days of Biden's presidency, he deported like 29,000 immigrants. So there's not a forced stop on ICE. And then also too, like, he tried to slow deportations, but a federal judge in Texas said no, blocked that order, and so deportations have continued.
Misdemeanor convicts, gang members are back out on the street.
And then again, equating illegal immigrants with their criminal aspects, demonizing the whole mass of them, because we just don't know how many criminals came in with them. We don't know.
Need to get to the bottom of it. The American people have a right to know.
American victims are just collateral damage on the road to open borders. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
But again, let's just ignore automation slowly taking 50% of our job markets, because that's not a focus of Fox News. It's the immigrants. The immigrants are easier to attack. But that has been Tox News. Follow me on Twitter at ToxinPod, TUXNPOD. And check out the YouTube channel, link in the description if you're listening to the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, hi. Like if you like, dislike if you don't, subscribe, unsubscribe, and try to support, good ethical immigration and refugee status, because people are going through hell. So, and it's only going to get worse as the climate crisis increases. So that's great. That's great. Let's keep building up this xenophobia so that people are afraid to cross our border when their countries are burning. All right. Yep. That's it. I'll see you next Monday. Yep. That's what a beautiful outro. If only I could get my music right, and I never do. There it is. Adios. Or should I say hasta luego?